Alina, I'm telling you, if we get there late, we'll never find a seat. Derek's tone was lighthearted, but had an underlying urgency. For as long as Alina could remember, Derek liked arriving places early. It was one of those quirks she found endearing and occasionally irritating. They lived in a pleasant corner of suburban Illinois, in a cozy rental house with a small front yard. Both were in their late 20s, having first met at a mutual friend's 4th of July barbecue. Alina often joked about how Derek's name sounded so American compared to her own. She had Russian ancestry, and her parents had moved to the United States when she was an infant. Their relationship felt easy, at least, that's what everyone around them said. They had met, hit it off right away, dated for a couple of years, and recently gotten engaged. Derek proposed on a windy afternoon while they were walking along the Chicago River, presenting her with a simple yet elegant ring. Alina accepted through tears of joy, but under the sweetness lay small tensions that occasionally bubbled to the surface. Alina had a habit of receiving calls at odd hours. She worked remotely for an international marketing firm, which meant clients could call anytime. Derek, on the other hand, managed a local electronics store and kept a more regular schedule. Over the past few months, Derek had begun to question the nature of some of those calls, especially when random foreign numbers pinged Alina in the middle of the night. She always said it was work-related, and she truly believed that explanation should suffice. Yet, Derek's posture would stiffen every time the phone rang outside normal business hours. Late one afternoon, Alina was busy checking wedding invitations, which were scattered over their small dining table. She was also making mental notes for her next online meeting. Meanwhile, Derek came home from work, set his keys on the kitchen counter, and kissed Alina on the cheek. "Hey, everything okay?" he asked, noticing her slightly frazzled look. "Just a lot going on," she replied. "But good news. We're meeting Veronica and Sam tonight at that new restaurant downtown." Derek nodded, relieved. "Great. I'm off tomorrow, so it works out." The plan was a double date. Veronica, one of Alina's closest friends, had been pushing for them to try the newly opened bistro called Bellington's. It was rumored to be stylish, with menu items that combined classic American cuisine and some international twists. Alina looked forward to the outing, hoping it might ease Derek's stress as well. He'd been working extra hours, trying to save money for both the wedding and a potential down payment on a small condo. She admired his diligence. It was part of why she said yes when he proposed. Despite the general calmness of the moment, Alina sensed an undercurrent of worry in Derek. The tension felt almost intangible, like a faint static before a storm. However, she pushed the concern away, choosing to focus on the day's tasks. She hoped the dinner that evening would be yet another step in solidifying their bright future together, never suspecting that it would instead set the stage for a heart-wrenching misunderstanding. Bellington sat on a bustling street in downtown Chicago, its glass facade reflecting the glow of city lights. Inside, the tables were tastefully spaced, each adorned with crisp white linens and small centerpieces of fresh flowers. Low pendant lights and the hum of conversation enveloped them in a cozy, intimate atmosphere. Alina and Derek arrived first. She wore a sleek black dress with a subtle gold necklace, while Derek had chosen a casual, stylish blazer over a pale blue shirt. They took their seats at a corner table, near a window that overlooked the street. Moments later, Veronica and Sam walked in, greeting Alina and Derek with broad smiles. The server approached, handing them menus. Alina could see the spark of excitement in Veronica's eyes. Her friend loved trying new places and had been hyping up this bistro for weeks. Alina shared the enthusiasm, scanning the menu for something enticing. "Everything sounds so good," Veronica said, leaning in. "Might have to order an appetizer or two." "Go for it," Derek encouraged. "We're celebrating, right?" The four of them chatted about their jobs, upcoming wedding details, and random tidbits of gossip they'd heard around the city. Sam launched into a funny story about his coworker messing up an entire day's worth of shipping labels, drawing laughter from everyone. Alina felt relief in these moments, appreciating Derek's calm presence. All day, she'd worried about the possibility of him snapping about her phone calls again, but tonight he seemed relaxed. Their server returned, placing the chosen appetizers, a small plate of crab cakes and a cheese platter, between them. Just as Alina was about to sample the crab cakes, her phone vibrated loudly against the table. She looked at the screen. It was an unknown number. Her immediate thought was that it might be a client from overseas. She hesitated, debating whether to ignore it. However, she didn't want to risk missing an important work call, so she politely excused herself and answered. "Hello," she said softly, pressing the phone to her ear. Hi. Is this Tony's Pizzeria?" a confused voice asked. Alina blinked. "No, I'm sorry, you have the wrong number." She hung up, a hint of amusement crossing her face. It was such a random interruption, and she was about to explain the confusion when she noticed Derek's expression. His gaze was dark, his jaw set in rigid tension. "Allie," he muttered, leaning forward in his seat. "Who was that?" The tone in his voice was quiet but fierce, drawing Veronica and Sam's attention. Alina took a breath, reminding herself to stay calm. They'd had minor arguments about calls before, but nothing so intense or abrupt. "Someone dialed the wrong number," Alina explained carefully. Derek let out a short laugh devoid of any humor. "Right. A random call from an unknown number, and you just had to pick it up during dinner with friends." Veronica shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and Sam looked down, trying to figure out what to say. Alina steadied herself, feeling a pang of defensiveness. She hated that Derek never quite believed her about these random calls. "You know, I have work clients all over, and I don't want to miss something important," she said, doing her best to keep her voice steady. But this time, it was literally a wrong number. Somebody who thought I was a pizzeria. The tension around the table became palpable. Derek's expression was rigid, and before Alina could breathe a sigh of relief that the situation might settle, he spoke up again. His voice was louder this time, enough to catch the attention of patrons at nearby tables. "Is it always a wrong number? Because, you know, I've seen messages at odd hours." "Derek, please," Alina whispered, eyes darting around nervously. "I'm done being played," he said, cutting her off. "All this talk about wedding planning, our future together, saving for a condo, and here you are, stepping aside every time your phone rings. I've had enough of these unknown numbers." The words came out in a harsh rush, and Alina's cheeks flamed. She felt like the air had been knocked out of her. Veronica's mouth was slightly open, and Sam attempted to intervene. "Come on, Derek. Maybe it really was as Sam started." But Derek ignored him. "And you?" Derek turned to Alina, his voice rising. "Just pick up the phone without a second thought, like there's something you're hiding from me." "Are you cheating, Alina? Tell me the truth right now." Alina's eyes widened in shock. She could hear a collective hush in the restaurant as more diners glanced over in curiosity. Everything about this situation felt mortifying. Her voice trembled when she finally responded, barely above a whisper. "Derek, of course not. How could you even, eh?" "Stop lying," he roared. "I'm not an idiot." He abruptly rose from his seat. His chair made a scraping sound against the tile floor, echoing ominously in the tense silence. Heads around the restaurant were turning, eyes on Alina, on Derek, on their entire table. Alina felt tears prick at her eyes, though she tried to maintain composure. In that single moment, it seemed like Derek's entire trust in her had collapsed. She sat there, stunned, as Derek stormed out of the restaurant, leaving Alina behind, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Veronica and Sam stared after him in disbelief. Alina struggled to gather herself, feeling a wave of humiliation and sorrow. As murmurs spread among other patrons, all she could think was that she had never felt so betrayed or ashamed, especially by the one person she was about to marry. Alina spent most of that night in a haze. Veronica insisted on driving her home after the disastrous scene. Sam tried to call Derek several times, but Derek wasn't picking up. They finally reached Alina's house around midnight, and Veronica walked her to the door. "I can't believe he did that," Veronica whispered, her voice thick with empathy. I'm not sure what to think," Alina murmured, her eyes dry and exhausted. She had already cried enough in the car. Her mind replayed the mortifying scene at the restaurant over and over. She could see the shock in people's eyes, hear the gasps and hushed commentary. But it was Derek's voice that haunted her the most, the thunderous accusation that she was cheating on him. She'd never seen such anger and hurt in his eyes before. After Veronica left, Alina locked the door and practically collapsed onto the living room couch. For a long time, she just sat there, her mind swirling with questions. Why had Derek jumped to such a conclusion? Where was he now? Most importantly, could this relationship, the one she had invested so much love and hope in, survive such a brutal public humiliation? Eventually, she fell asleep, still in her dress. When she woke up, pale morning light streamed through the windows. Her head pounded, and her throat felt parched. The clock on the wall read 7:15 a.m. She pushed herself up, deciding that she'd better move to the bedroom and get properly dressed. However, as soon as she stood, she heard a familiar sound coming from the front door. Someone was knocking. She froze. It was too early for solicitors or deliveries. With a sinking feeling, she shuffled to the door and peered through the peephole. It was Derek. He looked haggard, like he hadn't slept, and he was still wearing the clothes from the previous night. Alina's heart hammered in her chest. Part of her wanted to open the door and hurl accusations. Another part of her just wanted to slam it in his face. She unlocked the door and opened it a crack. Derek's eyes were red, his hair disheveled, and he seemed immediately contrite. "Alina," he began softly. "Can we talk?" Even though her chest felt tight with anger and humiliation, Alina found herself stepping aside to let him in. Derek walked into the living room, noticing the scattered pillows and the fact that Alina was still wearing the same clothes from last night, though now wrinkled and slightly askew. "I'm sorry," he said, standing in the center of the room, arms hanging helplessly at his sides. "I was out of my mind last night. I had this fear that maybe you were hiding something. It's been building up for a while." Alina wrapped her arms around herself, trying to maintain her composure. "You humiliated me, Derek. I can't just pretend that didn't happen." Tears welled in his eyes. "I know. I was consumed by paranoia. There have been so many weird calls at odd times, and look, it's no excuse. I was wrong." His voice broke, and he took a step toward her. Alina's mind flashed back to the fiasco in the restaurant, and she instinctively flinched. Derek paused, his expression pained at her reaction. She realized how deeply shaken she was by the outburst. Typically, she would have found comfort in his presence, but now fear and hurt overshadowed that intimacy. "Please, Alina, I will do anything to fix this," he said, voice trembling. "I was up all night, going over everything in my head. I tried to drink my anger away at some bar, but it only made me realize how stupid and selfish I've been." She took a shaky breath. "Why would you ever accuse me like that? In front of all those people?" He lowered his gaze, visibly ashamed. "I lost control. When I saw you answer that call, all my insecurities just burst out. I thought the worst." Alina gazed at him in silence, deciding how much she could bear to say. Should she voice the raw anger pulsing through her? Should she remind him that they were supposed to be planning a wedding, not dealing with public accusations? Finally, she spoke, her voice low and measured. "One phone call. From a person who literally thought I was a pizzeria. And that's what triggered you." Derek swallowed hard. "I've been suspecting things for a while, and it's just, you always have these overseas clients, and sometimes you won't show me who's calling. I guess I never trusted that you were telling the truth." She felt a fresh wave of indignation. "Did you ever ask to see my phone? Did you ever talk to me about it, calmly?" "No, you just let it fester until you blew up." His eyes brimmed with tears again. "You're right. I should have talked it out. I should have handled this like an adult. Instead, I caused a scene and embarrassed you in front of everyone. I'm so sorry, Alina." She studied him, noticing how earnest and broken he seemed. This was the Derek she recognized, the caring man who worked extra hours for their future, who once left little notes on the fridge to say he loved her. Yet the image of him storming out in a rage was still fresh in her mind, a harsh reminder of how quickly trust could unravel. "I don't know if I can just forget about this," Alina finally said, her voice shaking. "I'm not asking you to forget," Derek whispered. "I know I've done something that might take you a long time to forgive. But I need you to know that I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show you I'm serious about fixing this." They stood there, the silence thick with unresolved tension. Eventually, Derek cleared his throat. May I just stay here for a bit, so we can talk more? Or would you prefer that I leave?" Alina closed her eyes, recalling how devastated she'd felt as he shouted at her in public. Part of her wanted to send him away, to make him feel the same sense of rejection. Another part remembered the good times they had shared, from lazy Sunday mornings to the excitement of their engagement. "Stay," she said quietly, stepping aside. "But don't expect this to be easy." Derek nodded, swallowing back tears. As he stepped in, he sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. Alina remained standing, unsure of what to do next. The weight of the previous night still hovered in the air. The question now was whether their relationship could be salvaged after such a painful blow, or if the cracks that had formed would prove too deep to mend. Word of the restaurant incident spread quickly among Alina and Derek's social circle. Veronica, who had been present, recounted the event to her boyfriend Sam and a few mutual friends, all of whom reached out to Alina in the following days with messages of concern. Alina's phone buzzed with texts from people wanting to check on her well-being and express their disbelief over Derek's actions. Meanwhile, Derek threw himself into damage control. He left apologetic voicemails for Sam, tried to explain the situation to Veronica, and even called Alina's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Townsend, to apologize. Her parents, who lived in a neighboring city, decided to visit unannounced one afternoon, eager to see Alina and figure out what was going on. Alina had mixed feelings about their arrival. She loved her parents, but she also dreaded the idea of them witnessing the strain in her relationship. Her father was a stern man with high expectations, and her mother was the emotional anchor who always tried to keep peace. The day they arrived, Alina answered the door, trying to mask her weariness. "Mom, Dad, I didn't expect you. I would have cleaned up more," she said, gesturing at the living room, where a few boxes of wedding decorations still lay scattered. Her mother, Susan Townsend, stepped in and gave her a tight hug. "We couldn't just stay away after hearing what happened." Her father, Richard Townsend, stepped inside with a serious expression. "Where's Derek?" "He's at work," Alina said, her voice subdued. They sat down, and her mother pressed for details. Alina recounted the events at the restaurant, her voice trembling with the memory. Occasionally, her father shook his head in disapproval. He had always admired Derek for his diligence, but public humiliation was a serious strike against him in Richard's eyes. When Derek eventually returned from work, he found Alina and her parents in the living room. He hesitated for a moment at the threshold, aware of the tension. Then, gathering his courage, he entered and greeted them respectfully. Richard gave him a curt nod. Susan managed a polite smile. "What happened, Derek?" Richard demanded, his stern gaze locking onto Derek. "I've always known you to be more level-headed than this." Derek swallowed. "You're right, sir. I have no excuse. I let my fear and jealousy overtake me." He proceeded to explain how he had felt insecure about Alina's late calls, how he thought she might be involved with someone else, and how he allowed those suspicions to simmer until they exploded at the worst possible time. Alina watched her father's expression shift from anger to guarded understanding, while her mother looked on sympathetically. "I understand jealousy," Richard said, his tone quieter but still firm. "But embarrassing my daughter publicly like that? Derek, you've got a lot to make up for." Derek nodded, hands folded in his lap. "Yes, sir." Though the conversation was tense, it ended on a slightly hopeful note. Alina's parents made it clear they expected Derek to properly earn back Alina's trust, no shortcuts. When they finally left, Alina felt drained, but also somewhat relieved that at least everything was out in the open. That evening, Veronica came by to drop off something Alina had left in her car, an extra pair of shoes she'd brought on the night of the restaurant fiasco. The moment Veronica walked in, Alina noticed the tension in her eyes. They sat at the dining table, sipping iced tea, and Veronica let out a long sigh. "You two okay?" she asked gently. "I wouldn't say okay," Alina admitted. "But we're talking. We're trying." Veronica nodded, fiddling with her glass. After a pause, she spoke in a rush. "Look, I care about you both, and I've seen you two happy. But, Alina, if Derek can do that once, you need to be sure he won't do it again. Public humiliation is serious." Alina's eyes stung with tears. "I know. I keep wondering if this is just a one-time mistake or if it's something deeper." They talked for nearly an hour, going back and forth about trust, about how insecurities can erode a relationship. Alina expressed her doubts, her hopes, and her fears. Veronica listened, occasionally offering bits of advice. Eventually, she gave Alina a long hug before heading out. When Derek got home from work that night, he found Alina sitting on the back porch, staring at the sky. The quiet suburban neighborhood was bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. Derek sat beside her. For a moment, they said nothing. The silence was both comforting and heavy. He finally broke it. "I want you to know I've scheduled an appointment with a therapist." Alina's surprise was evident in her eyes. "You did?" He nodded, fiddling with the hem of his shirt. "I realize I have some issues with trust and insecurity, and it's not fair to dump that on you." A mixture of relief and caution flooded her. I think that's good, Derek. For both of us. Maybe we could even do couples therapy." "I'd like that," he agreed quietly. They lapsed back into silence, but it felt less suffocating this time. Alina realized that while the road ahead would be difficult, Derek's willingness to address his problems gave her a faint glimmer of hope. Yet, doubts lingered. Could therapy alone mend the cracks that had formed after such a public, painful incident? Would their families and friends truly forgive Derek? And most pressing of all, could Alina forgive Derek? The answers remained elusive, but at least the door to reconciliation was open, if only a crack. The question was how they would move forward without resentment overshadowing every step. The following weeks were a turbulent blend of tentative steps forward and sudden waves of insecurity. Derek began attending therapy sessions once a week, and on one occasion, he invited Alina to join him. Sitting in a quiet, softly lit office, they talked through their issues with a calm, neutral mediator. Alina found the experience both challenging and surprisingly illuminating. She had never realized how deeply rooted Derek's insecurities were, stemming from an old relationship in which he'd been cheated on. "It's not an excuse," he explained, voice thick with emotion. "But it's the reason I reacted that way when I saw another unknown number calling you." Alina nodded, tears clinging to her lashes. "I wish you had talked to me sooner, so I could reassure you." The therapist, a patient woman named Dr. Morgan, guided them through exercises to rebuild trust. They practiced open communication, including sharing phone call logs if necessary. Alina, who never had anything to hide, realized how simple gestures of transparency could ease Derek's anxiety. Derek, for his part, worked on self-awareness, learning to check his impulses before they became destructive outbursts. Outside therapy, life tried to return to a semblance of normality. Alina still managed her remote marketing position, occasionally receiving late-night calls from clients across the globe. But now, instead of tensing up when the phone rang, she'd show Derek who was calling, or let him listen in when it was appropriate. Derek found these small acts reassuring, though he admitted he needed to learn to trust her without constant verification. Sam and Veronica invited them out for coffee one weekend, hoping to mend any lingering awkwardness. While the memory of the restaurant incident still hovered, the four managed a cautious camaraderie. Veronica, though cordial, remained protective of Alina. Sam tried to lighten the mood with humor. "You gotta admit," Sam said, stirring his latte, "this is going to be one heck of a story to tell your kids someday. Your dad thought your mom was cheating because she got a call from a random pizzeria guy." Alina gave a half-smile, and Derek chuckled sheepishly. The tension in the air eased slightly, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. Even so, Alina could feel the unspoken subtext. This relationship had nearly imploded once. Could it survive another blow? She tried to tackle her own swirling emotions. A large part of her wanted to move on and embrace the better version of Derek. Another part remained angry, still flinching at the memory of him shouting accusations in a crowded restaurant. Over time, that anger softened, but it never vanished completely. A month after the incident, Derek decided to do something dramatic to prove his commitment. He asked Alina if they could revisit Bellington's, the very same restaurant where everything had gone wrong. At first, she was hesitant, but she sensed the gesture behind his request. "This is where I messed up," he told her quietly, "and I want us to have a better memory here. If you're willing." Taking a deep breath, Alina agreed. The next Saturday, they drove downtown, hand in hand. Her stomach fluttered with anxiety as they stepped inside. The decor looked the same, the subdued lighting, the elegant tables. A wave of memories hit her, but she steeled herself. They requested the same corner table. Derek placed an order for their favorite appetizer. As they waited, he reached across the table and held her hand. "Alina," he said softly, "I need you to know that I wake up every day determined to do better by you. I love you, and I'm beyond sorry for how I hurt you." She felt tears gathering but blinked them back. "I love you too." In a quiet voice, he continued, "The therapy sessions have helped me see how toxic my insecurities were. I won't promise I'm magically cured, but I promise I'll never let myself lash out at you like that again." Alina managed a small smile. "We'll keep working on it together." As their meal arrived, an aromatic salmon dish for Alina and a grilled steak for Derek, she noticed how calm everything felt, even though a faint ghost of the past still lingered in the air. She could tell Derek was nervous. He kept glancing around to see if anyone recognized them. But no one paid special attention, and for once, Alina felt the sense of normalcy returning. They spoke in hushed voices about their wedding plans, carefully resurrecting the excitement they'd once shared. When the check came, Derek insisted on paying. Before they left, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. "It's kind of silly," he admitted, handing it to her. Alina unfolded the note and read, "I vow to trust you, love you, and respect you every day for the rest of our lives. I vow to speak up when I'm scared and ask for help before I lash out. I vow to stand by you as an equal partner, never overshadowing your voice." Her eyes filled with tears. It reminded her of the vow-like notes they'd toyed with when discussing their wedding. She closed her eyes, taking a moment to steady her breath. "It's beautiful," she whispered, pressing the note close to her heart. Derek exhaled, relief evident on his face. They left the restaurant, hand in hand. Outside, the Chicago skyline glimmered under the streetlights. Though the air carried a chill, Alina felt a warmth in her chest. Perhaps it was hope, a hope she wasn't sure she'd feel again after that humiliating night.